I watched through my window as the cement truck backed up to my driveway at 6 in the morning. Karen stood there with her arms crossed, that smug smile on her face, directing the workers like she owned the entire neighborhood. By the time I ran outside in my pajamas, they'd already poured a 3-foot-wide concrete barrier right across my driveway entrance. "Enjoy walking to work, David," she called out, laughing as she climbed into her luxury SUV. I stood there, shaking with rage, staring at the wet concrete that had just trapped my car in my own garage. But what Karen didn't know was that she'd just made the biggest mistake of her miserable HOA-obsessed life. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone. After 15 years of her harassment, this was the line she shouldn't have crossed. The whole nightmare started 3 months earlier. In April of 2024, when I made the critical error of parking my work truck in my own driveway overnight. I'm a licensed contractor, and my white Ford F-250, with my company logo on the side, had been parked in the exact same spot every night for the past 8 years without a single complaint. But that was before Chun became the vice president of our Riverside Meadows I was eating breakfast when I got the first letter. The envelope was bright yellow, impossible to miss, with violation notice stamped across it in angry red letters. I opened it to find 3 pages of single-spaced text detailing how my commercial vehicle violated Section 7.3b of our HOA regulations, which prohibited any vehicle over 6,000 pounds or displaying commercial signage from being visible from the street. Between the hours of 8 p.m. and 7 a.m., the fine was $250, increasing by $50 per day until the violation was corrected. I read it 3 times, convinced it was a joke. My truck weighed 5,800 pounds, well under the limit, and I'd been parking it there since 2016. I'd even checked the rules when I first bought it. That afternoon, I drove to the HOA office, a small building next to our community center. Barbara Martinez, our HOA president, was there, her blonde hair pulled back, red-framed glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed paperwork. She looked up when I entered, and her warm smile immediately put me at ease. "David, good to see you. What brings you in?" I handed her the violation notice. "I got this today. Barbara, I've been parking that truck there for 8 years. What's going on?" Barbara's smile faded as she read the letter. She shook her head slowly, and I could see genuine frustration in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, David. This is Karen's doing." She pushed through an amendment to the parking rules at last month's meeting. What meeting? I didn't get any notice. Exactly. Barbara set the letter down and folded her hands. She scheduled it for 3 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon when she knew most working residents couldn't attend. Only 14 people showed up out of our 236 households. She needed a quorum of 25%, so she marked several people as proxy votes without their actual permission. My jaw dropped. "That's fraud. That's Karen," Barbara said with a heavy sigh. "I've been trying to fight her on this, David. I really have. But she's gotten very good at manipulating the system. She knows exactly which rules to exploit and when to schedule votes to get what she wants. So what do I do?" Barbara pulled out a folder and started making notes. "First, we challenge the legitimacy of that vote. I've been documenting everything. Second, you can park in guest parking overnight until we get this sorted out. And third," she looked up at me seriously, "watch your back. When Karen targets someone, she doesn't stop until she gets what she wants. And for some reason, she's decided you're her new project." I left the office feeling uneasy. Barbara's warning echoed in my mind as I drove home. I'd lived in Riverside Meadows for 16 years. I'd raised my daughter here, been to countless block parties, helped neighbors with repairs, coached Little League. This was supposed to be a community, not a battleground. But Karen had other plans. The next morning, I parked my truck in guest parking, slot number 17, right in front of the community center. It was a 10-minute walk to my house. Annoying but manageable. At 11:30 a.m., I got another yellow envelope. This violation notice informed me that guest parking was limited to 72 hours maximum and was intended for visitors, not residents seeking to circumvent parking regulations. The fine was $300. I called Barbara immediately. "She can't do this. She just did, Barbara said, and I could hear her typing frantically. David, I'm building a case here, but I need time. Can you park on the street outside the community? The nearest street parking is half a mile away. I know. I'm sorry. Just give me 2 weeks. I'm calling an emergency board meeting, and I'm going to bring evidence of all of Karen's procedural violations. We can overturn everything she's done, but I have to do this by the book, or she'll find a way to twist it around. So I parked half a mile away and walked, every morning and every evening, in the rain, in the heat, carrying my tools and supplies. My neighbors started noticing. Old Mr. Patterson from 3 houses down asked me why I was walking past my own house every day. When I explained, he shook his head in disgust. "That woman is poison," he said. "She gave my wife a violation for having her grandkid's tricycle on the front lawn. Said it was visual clutter. It was there for 2 hours while they played." I heard similar stories everywhere. Karen had fined the Johnsons $500 for painting their shutters forest green instead of the approved hunter green. She'd threatened the Rodriguezes with legal action because their vegetable garden was visible from the street. She'd even tried to fine Mrs. Chun, no relation to Karen, for having a mourning wreath on her door more than 30 days after her husband's funeral. But Barbara was fighting back. I started getting emails from her with updates on her investigation. She'd discovered that Karen had awarded her brother-in-law's landscaping company a $12,000 contract without competitive bidding, purchased a $5,000 outdoor furniture set for the community center from her sister's store at nearly twice the market rate, claimed $750 in administrative expenses with no receipts or documentation, used HOA funds to pay for her personal attorney during a property dispute with her neighbor. "This is embezzlement," I told Barbara when we met at a coffee shop downtown, away from Karen's prying eyes. "You need to report this to the authorities." Barbara nodded, but she looked worried. "I will, but I need ironclad proof." Karen is very careful. She has just enough documentation to claim everything was legitimate, and she has 2 board members who back her up on everything. If I accuse her without absolute proof, she could sue me personally for defamation. So what do we do? I'm working with our HOA attorney, the one who actually represents the homeowners, not Karen's personal lawyer. We're going through every transaction from the past year. We're going to expose everything at the next board meeting in June. That meeting was still 3 weeks away. In the meantime, Karen escalated. I came home from a job site on May 15th to find a bright orange sticker on my garage door. Unapproved modification notice. According to the violation letter tucked under my doormat, my garage door needed to be repainted because it was faded and detracted from community aesthetics. The fine was $800, with an additional $300 per week until my garage door was 2 years old and in perfect condition. I took photos, dated them, and sent them to Barbara. She's lost her mind. "She's desperate," Barbara replied. "She knows I'm building a case. She's trying to stack up enough violations to force you out before the June meeting. If you sell or move out, you become a less sympathetic victim in the eyes of the other homeowners. I'm not going anywhere." "Good. Neither am I. Keep documenting everything, every letter, every fine, every interaction. Take photos, keep receipts, save emails. We're going to need all of it." The violations kept coming. My mailbox was the wrong shade of black. My house numbers were 1/4 inch too small according to a new regulation Karen had invented. My lawn was allegedly 1 inch too high in one section, despite the fact that I'd mowed it the day before. Each violation came with escalating fines. By the end of May, Karen claimed I owed the HOA $4,200. I refused to pay a single cent. That's when things got dangerous. On June 2nd, 4 days before the board meeting where Barbara planned to expose Karen's corruption, I woke up at 5:45 a.m. to the sound of a truck engine. I looked out my bedroom window and froze. A cement truck was backing into my driveway. I threw on clothes and ran outside. But Karen was already there, standing on the sidewalk with a clipboard and that infuriating smile. She was wearing her usual power outfit, a red blazer over a black dress, her dark hair pulled back severely. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted. "Enforcing HOA regulations," she said calmly. According to Section 9, the HOA has the right to make necessary modifications to common areas and property boundaries to ensure compliance with community standards. My driveway isn't a common area. The first 3 feet of your driveway is actually within the HOA's maintenance easement, Karen said, tapping her clipboard. I had it surveyed, and since you've repeatedly violated parking regulations and refused to pay your fines, the board has voted to install a traffic control measure. What board? Barbara would never approve this. Karen's smile widened. President Martinez was unfortunately unable to attend our emergency session last night. We had exactly enough members for a quorum. I pulled out my phone to call Barbara, but Karen's workers were already pouring concrete. They worked fast, clearly experienced, creating a solid barrier about 3 feet wide and 8 inches high right across my driveway entrance, perfectly positioned within that easement zone. You can't do this, I said. But even as I spoke, I knew she already had. The cement was setting fast in the morning heat. Within 20 minutes, it was done. A solid concrete wall blocking my driveway, trapping my truck in my garage. Karen walked over to inspect the work, then turned to me with mock sympathy. I'm sure you understand, David. This is for the good of the community. Once you've paid your outstanding fines and agreed to comply with all parking regulations, we can discuss removing this barrier. Have a wonderful day. She drove away in her silver Lexus SUV, leaving me standing there, staring at the concrete barrier that had just distorted my access to my own property. I called Barbara. She answered on the first ring, and I could hear the fury in her voice before I even explained what happened. I know. Mrs. Patterson saw the whole thing and called me. David, this is beyond illegal. This is property damage, trespassing, and possibly even false imprisonment, since you can't get your vehicle out. We're taking this to the police and our attorney right now. The board meeting is in 4 days. She's trying to intimidate you into backing down before I can expose her, Barbara finished. It's not going to work. This is the evidence we needed that she's completely out of control. She just handed us a nuclear weapon. But as I stood there looking at that concrete barrier, I felt something shift inside me. Barbara was playing by the rules, building her case, doing everything legally and correctly. Karen had just shown me she didn't care about rules at all, and if she wanted to play dirty, I was about to teach her a lesson she'd never forget. I pulled out my phone and made a call to my old college roommate, Marcus, who now worked as a civil engineer for the county. Marcus, I need to ask you something about property easements and drainage requirements. As I explained the situation, I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. Oh, man, he said finally. David, if what you're telling me is accurate, they just created an illegal obstruction in a designated drainage corridor. That whole area is supposed to remain clear for stormwater management. What happens if it's not clear? Well, when it rains, the water has to go somewhere, and if it can't drain properly... He paused. Where exactly is the HOA parking lot in relation to your property? I looked up the street at the community center and the large parking lot beside it, where Karen and the other board members parked every day. Downhill from me, the natural drainage runs right toward it. Marcus was quiet for a moment. David, I can't tell you what to do here, but I can tell you that if you wanted to file a formal complaint with the county about an illegal drainage obstruction, I could have an inspector out there within 24 hours. And if they determine that barrier is creating a flooding hazard, they have the authority to issue an immediate removal order. I thanked him and hung up, a plan forming in my mind, but I didn't call the county. Not yet, because the weather forecast for the next week showed something very interesting. A major storm system moving in from the Pacific, expected to dump 3 to 4 inches of rain on our area over a 48-hour period. And that storm was supposed to arrive exactly 1 day before the board meeting. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Karen wanted to play games with concrete. Fine. Let's see how she liked it when nature played back. I spent the next 3 days preparing, making calls, documenting everything with photos and videos. Barbara thought I was just gathering evidence for the meeting. She had no idea what I was really planning. The morning of June 5th arrived with dark clouds on the horizon and the first drops of rain starting to fall. I stood at my window, watching the storm roll in, my phone in my hand with the county inspector's number ready to dial. Karen's silver Lexus sat in the HOA parking lot, right in the lowest section where the drainage had always been worst. She had no idea what was about to happen. The rain began to fall harder, and I watched the water start to pool on my driveway, blocked by her concrete barrier, backing up exactly the way Marcus had predicted. But instead of flooding my property, the water was finding a new path, following the natural slope of the land, flowing faster and faster toward the parking lot below. I picked up my phone and pressed dial. County Drainage Enforcement. Yes, I need to report an illegal obstruction. What would you do if your HOA blocked your driveway? Would you fight back legally, or would you have handled this differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and wait until you hear what happens when that storm hits. The county inspector arrived within 90 minutes. A no-nonsense woman named Patricia Rodriguez, who'd been handling drainage violations for 12 years. She stood in my driveway with a laser measuring device and a clipboard. Rain starting to fall more heavily around us. "Mr. Harrington, can you show me the exact placement of this barrier?" she asked. I pointed to Karen's concrete wall. "Right there." They poured it 4 days ago without any permits or drainage impact study. Patricia walked around the barrier, taking measurements, photographs, checking our tablet against county records. The rain was really coming down now, and I could already see water beginning to pool behind the concrete. "This is bad," she said finally. "According to our records, this entire corridor is designated as a primary drainage pathway for stormwater management. That barrier is creating a complete obstruction." She looked up at the darkening sky. "And with this storm system moving in, you're about to have serious flooding issues." "Not me," I said, pointing down the hill toward the HOA parking lot. "The water's going to redirect that way. Natural slope of the land." Patricia followed my gesture, and her eyes widened. "How many vehicles are typically parked down there?" 20 to 30 on any given day. "Right now, I'd say about 25. She pulled out her phone and made a call. "Yeah. It's Rodriguez. I'm at Riverside Meadows HOA, and we've got an emergency drainage obstruction. I need public works out here now with barriers and pumps. We're looking at potential flash flooding in a parking area." She paused, listening. "No, the rain is already starting. We've got maybe 2 hours before this gets critical." She turned back to me. "Mr. Harrison, I'm issuing an immediate removal order for this barrier. The HOA will be fined $1,500 per day until it's removed, and they're liable for any flooding damage that occurs as a result of this obstruction." "How long will removal take?" "In good weather, a few hours. In this..." She looked at the rain, now falling in sheets. "They can't safely remove it until the storm passes. We're talking at least 48 to 72 hours. I tried to hide my smile. "So the HOA parking lot is going to flood?" "Almost certainly. I'm going to go down there now and post emergency notices. Everyone needs to move their vehicles immediately." She handed me a citation document. "You'll need this for your records. And Mr. Harrison, whatever dispute you're having with your HOA, this should resolve it pretty definitively. This is a major code violation with significant liability implications." As Patricia drove away to warn the HOA, I went back inside and called Barbara. "The county inspector just left," I told her. "She confirmed the barrier is illegal and creating a flooding hazard. The parking lot is about to become a swimming pool." Barbara was quiet for a moment. "David, what did you do?" "I reported an illegal drainage obstruction. That's all. The board meeting is tomorrow night. Karen's car is in that parking lot right now. So are the cars of the 2 board members who always vote with her." "I know." Another pause. "I should tell you this is wrong. I should say we need to take the high road. But Karen has been destroying this community for 2 years. She's stolen from us, harassed families, driven good people to sell their homes just to escape her, and now she's committed actual property crimes." Barbara's voice hardened. "Let it flood. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly why it happened." The rain intensified over the next hour. I stood at my window, watching the water accumulate behind the concrete barrier, exactly as Marcus had predicted. The barrier was like a dam, forcing the water to find a new path, and that path led directly downhill. At 2:15 p.m., I saw Patricia's public works truck arrive at the HOA parking lot, along with 2 other county vehicles. They started putting out orange cones and emergency notices. I grabbed my phone and walked down to watch. The scene was chaotic. Patricia and her team were going car to car, placing bright yellow notices on windshields. Emergency flood zone, move vehicle immediately. But most people were at work. The parking lot was full of empty cars. Karen's silver Lexus sat in her designated vice president parking spot, which happened to be in the absolute lowest point of the lot. I saw Patricia notice it, check her clipboard, then shake her head. She placed a notice on the windshield and moved on. By 3 p.m., the water was really flowing. I could see it coursing down the street, following the curb line, gathering speed as it approached the parking lot. The storm drains couldn't handle the volume. They'd been designed assuming normal drainage patterns, not accounting for a concrete barrier redirecting an entire watershed. At 3:30, I got a call from an unknown number. "This is Karen Chun. Remove that concrete barrier immediately." "Hello, Karen. I'm afraid I can't do that. It's your barrier, not mine." The county inspector said, "You filed a complaint. I reported an illegal obstruction on my property. The county agreed with me. If you want it removed, I suggest you call your concrete company, though I hear they can't work safely in this rain." "You did this deliberately. You knew it would flood." "Actually, Karen, you did this. You installed an illegal barrier in a drainage corridor without permits, without an environmental impact study, and without any legal authority. I just reported it. What happens next is entirely your responsibility." She was screaming now. "My car is in that parking lot. Do you have any idea how much that Lexus cost?" $68,000. I said calmly. "I saw it on the registration certificate you left on your dashboard that time you illegally parked in my assigned guest spot. You know, the violation you never actually got cited for." The line went dead. By 4 p.m., the water had reached the parking lot. It started as small streams flowing into the low areas, then rapidly built into a rushing current. The storm drains in the parking lot were completely overwhelmed, gurgling and spitting water back up. I wasn't the only one watching. Neighbors had started to gather, standing under umbrellas and awnings, watching the water rise. Mr. Patterson was there, grinning like it was Christmas morning. "Is that Karen's Lexus?" he asked me. "Sure is good." The water rose fast. Within 30 minutes, it was 3 inches deep across the entire parking lot. Within an hour, it was 8 inches. The lowest section, where Karen and her allied board members parked, was under 12 inches of water. I took video of everything on my phone. So did at least 15 other residents. At 5:30 p.m., as the water reached 18 inches in the deepest section, Karen arrived in a taxi, along with Richard Summers and Linda Walsh, the 2 board members who always voted with her. They stood at the edge of the parking lot, staring in horror at their submerged vehicles. Karen's Lexus was in the worst position. Water was up to her door handles. Richard's BMW was nearly as bad. Linda's Mercedes was slightly higher, but still had water covering the wheels. Patricio appeared from the community center, where she'd apparently been setting up water barriers. "Ma'am, you need to stay back. This is now an official flood zone." "That's my car," Karen shrieked, pointing at the Lexus. "I understand, ma'am, but it's not safe to approach. The water's still rising, and we don't know what's underneath. Could be debris, could be compromised pavement. You need to file an insurance claim and wait for the water to recede." "This is his fault." Karen spun around and spotted me standing about 50 feet away with the other residents. She started marching toward me, but Patricia stepped in front of her. "Ma'am, if you're referring to Mr. Harrison, he's not at fault here. Your HOA created an illegal drainage obstruction. This flooding is a direct result of that barrier. The county will be sending you a full report, along with citations and fines. He planned this. He knew it would rain." Patricia's expression didn't change. "Are you claiming Mr. Harrison controls the weather, ma'am?" Several neighbors laughed. Karen's face turned bright red. "The barrier needs to be removed immediately," Patricia continued. "Every hour it remains is $1,500 in fines, plus liability for flood damage. I suggest you contact a removal company as soon as the weather permits safe work." Karen looked like she wanted to explode, but she just turned and stormed away. Though she couldn't actually go anywhere, since her car was underwater and the taxi had already left. Barbara appeared beside me, umbrella in hand. "How deep do you think it'll get?" "Mark is set up to 24 inches in the low spots if the rain continues at this rate. Karen's Lexus will be totaled." "Probably." Barbara was quiet for a moment, then said, "I shouldn't be enjoying this, but you are." "I really am." She smiled for the first time in weeks. "The board meeting is tomorrow at 7 p.m. I'm guessing Karen is going to have a lot to answer for." The rain continued through the night. By morning, the water in the parking lot had reached its peak at 22 inches in the deepest section. Karen's Lexus was completely flooded. Richard's BMW wasn't much better. Several other cars belonging to residents who hadn't seen the notices in time were also damaged. But the real shock came when the county's full inspection report arrived. Barbara called me at 8 a.m. "David, you need to hear this." Patricia sent over the preliminary findings. The concrete barrier isn't just illegal because of drainage. They never pulled a permit for construction on HOA common property. They used a contractor who isn't licensed for commercial work. And here's the best part. The barrier was poured partially on county right-of-way, which means Karen authorized construction on public property without government approval. What does that mean legally? It means the county can pursue criminal charges for unauthorized construction on public land. It means the HOAS insurance won't cover any of this because it was unpermitted work. And it means every bit of flood damage is directly attributable to Karen's decision to install that barrier. I let that sink in. How many cars were damaged? Final count is 11 vehicles. Total estimated damage is around $180,000, and that's not counting the damage to the parking lot itself from the flooding. Can they sue the 8th? They can, and probably will. But David, there's more. I've been going through the HOA finances all night, preparing for today's meeting. We have $72,000 in our reserve fund. That's supposed to cover emergencies and major repairs for a community of 236 homes. Karen has been steadily draining it with her sweetheart deals and fake expenses. If we get hit with even a fraction of these damage claims, we're bankrupt. What happens then? Special assessment. Every homeowner in Riverside Meadows gets billed their share of the debt. We're talking potentially $2,000 to $3,000 per household, all because Karen wanted to play dictator. The board meeting that night was the most well-attended in Riverside Meadows history. The community center was packed with over 180 residents, many standing because there weren't enough chairs. I arrived early and sat in the front row next to Mr. Patterson and several other homeowners Karen had targeted over the years. Karen sat at the board table, still in her red blazer, despite everything. Richard and Linda flanked her, both looking miserable. Their water-damaged cars were in body shops, with repair estimates ranging from $15,000 to $30,000 each. Barbara sat at the head of the table. As HOA president, her expression calm and professional, but I could see the determination in her eyes behind those red-framed glasses. At exactly 7 p.m., Barbara called the meeting to order. "Good evening, everyone. I know we have a lot to discuss tonight, particularly regarding yesterday's flooding incident. But before we get to that, I need to address some serious irregularities I've discovered in our HOA's financial and procedural practices over the past several months." Karen tried to interrupt. "Madam President, I think we should focus on the immediate crisis." "The immediate crisis is a symptom of deeper problems," Barbara said firmly, "and as president of this HOA, elected by all of you to represent your interests, I have a duty to bring those problems to light." She opened a thick folder and began presenting her evidence. Every questionable expense, every suspicious contract, every procedural violation Karen had committed over the past year. The room grew quieter and quieter as the list went on. The $12,000 landscaping contract to her brother-in-law, when competitive bids would have been around $7,000. The $5,000 furniture purchase from her sister's store for items worth, maybe, $2,000. The fabricated administrative expenses totaling over $9,000, with no receipts. The parking regulation amendment passed with fraudulent proxy votes, and now the unauthorized concrete barrier that had caused nearly $200,000 in damages. These aren't mistakes, Barbara said clearly. This is a pattern of self-dealing, fraud, and abuse of power, and it needs to end tonight. She looked directly at Karen. Vice President Chun, I am formally calling for your immediate resignation from the board, along with the resignations of Richard Summers and Linda Walsh for their complicity in these violations. The room erupted. Residents were shouting, some in support of Barbara, others in shock at the revelations. Karen stood up, her face pale. This is a witch hunt. Barbara has had it out for me since day one. I have documentation, Barbara said, raising her voice to be heard. Bank records, emails, contracts, meeting minutes. Everything I've stated is factual and verifiable. I've also reported these findings to our HOA attorney, who has confirmed that you have violated both our bylaws and potentially state laws regarding HOA financial management. Mr. Pedersen stood up. I move that we accept the resignations of Karen Chun, Richard Summers, and Linda Walsh, effective immediately. Called out at least a dozen voices. All in favor? Barbara asked. The response was overwhelming. Nearly every hand in the room went up. Moshe carries. Barbara made a note in her records. Karen, Richard, Linda, you are hereby removed from the board. Please surrender any HOA property, including keys and documents. Within 24 hours. Karen grabbed her purse, shaking with rage. You haven't heard the last of this. I'll sue. I'll sue the HOA. I'll sue you personally. Barbara, you're welcome to try, Barbara said calmly. But I should warn you that the county is considering criminal charges for the unauthorized construction on public property, and the 11 homeowners whose cars were damaged are forming a group to pursue civil action against you personally for the flooding you caused. You might want to save your money for lawyers instead of throwing it away on frivolous lawsuits. Karen stormed out, Richard and Linda hurrying after her. The room watched them go in silence. Then someone started clapping. Then another person. Within seconds, the entire room was on their feet, applauding Barbara. She waited for the noise to die down, then continued. Now, we have some serious work ahead of us. We need to elect new board members, address the flood damage, remove that illegal barrier, and begin the process of recovering the funds Karen misappropriated. It's going to be a long road. We're with you, Barbara, I called out, and the room echoed with agreement. As the meeting continued, discussing practical matters and emergency measures, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope, but I also knew Karen. She didn't give up easily, and she'd just been publicly humiliated in front of the entire community. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. 3 days later, I came home from work to find a courier waiting at my door with a thick envelope. Inside was a lawsuit. Karen was suing me personally for $350,000, claiming they maliciously and deliberately caused flooding through fraudulent complaints to county officials. She was also suing Barbara for defamation, the HOA for wrongful termination, and had filed complaints against me with the state contractors licensing board, the county building department, and even the Better Business Bureau. The message was clear. If she was going down, she was taking everyone with her. My phone rung. It was Barbara. David, did you get? Yeah. $350,000. She served me with papers too. $500,000 for defamation. Barbara's voice was steady, but I could hear the stress underneath. She's filed complaints against the HOA with the State Attorney General's office, claiming we violated her rights. She's demanding an independent investigation. I looked at the lawsuit again, flipping through pages of allegations and legal jargon. That's when I saw it. A small detail in her statement of damages. Something that didn't quite add up. Barbara, what was the estimated value of Karen's Lexus before the flood? She claimed it was worth $68,000 in her insurance filing. Why? I smiled slowly. Because in this lawsuit, she's claiming it was worth $95,000. She's inflating the damages. That's insurance fraud and false statements in a legal filing. I added, Barbara, I think Karen just made another mistake. Maybe her biggest one yet. Karen is now suing everyone in sight. Do you think she'll get away with it? Or has she finally gone too far? Let me know in the comments. I sat across from my attorney, James Chun, no relation to Karen, in his downtown office 3 days after being served with the lawsuit. James was scanning through Karen's legal filing, his expression growing increasingly amused. She's asking for $350,000, he said, flipping pages, based on property damage, emotional distress, loss of vehicle use, and reputational harm. He looked up at me. David, this is one of the sloppiest lawsuits I've seen in 20 years of practice. How so? For starters, she claims her Lexus was worth $95,000, but according to the VANG number she provided, that model and year has a market value of $62,000 to $68,000 maximum. She's inflating the value by roughly 30%. That's fraud, right? It gets better. James turned to another page. She claims the flooding caused $50,000 in damage to personal property inside her vehicle, but her insurance claim, which she attached as evidence, lists only $12,000 in personal property. She's literally contradicting her own documentation. I leaned forward. Can we use that against her? Absolutely. But here's the really interesting part. He pulled out another document. I did some digging into her background. Karen Chun has filed 6 lawsuits in the past 8 years. Every single one was either dismissed or settled for nuisance amounts. She has a pattern of filing aggressive, inflated claims and hoping people settle rather than fight. What do you recommend? We fight. Hard we file a motion to dismiss based on her fraudulent damage claims, and we counterclaim for malicious prosecution and abuse of process. Plus, I'm going to notify her insurance company about the discrepancies between her insurance claim and this lawsuit. That's going to trigger an investigation. What about Barbara's defamation suit? I spoke with Barbara's attorney this morning. Everything Barbara said at that board meeting was factual and backed by documentation. Defamation requires false statements. Karen doesn't have a case. We're actually coordinating our defense strategies. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. So we're going to be okay. Better than okay. David, Karen just handed us everything we need to destroy her credibility completely. Give me 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks were intense. James filed our response to Karen's lawsuit, complete with a detailed breakdown of every false and inflated claim she'd made. He also filed a formal complaint with the State Bar about Karen's attorney, who had apparently failed to verify any of Karen's damage figures before filing. But the real bomb dropped when the insurance company got involved. I was at a job site when James called me, barely able to contain his excitement. David, you're not going to believe this. Karen's insurance company just denied her entire claim for the Lexus. What? Why? Because when they investigated, they discovered she'd been lying about the vehicle's condition before the flood. She claimed it was in pristine condition, worth top market value. But the pre-flood service records show it had 87,000 miles, needed $4,000 in transmission work, and had been in 2 previous accidents that she never disclosed. So the car was already damaged. Exactly. And get this. Her insurance company is now investigating her for insurance fraud. They found discrepancies in 3 previous claims she'd filed over the years. Small stuff. Inflated repair costs. That kind of thing. But it establishes a pattern. What does this mean for the lawsuit? It means her entire case just collapsed. The flooding might have actually done her a favor by totaling a car that was already a mechanical nightmare. But instead of accepting that, she got greedy and tried to inflate everything. Now she's potentially facing criminal charges. That same afternoon, Barbara called me with her own news. David, the state attorney general's office, responded to Karen's complaint. about the HOA. They reviewed all my documentation and determined that the board meeting was conducted properly and Karen's removal was justified. But here's the interesting part. They're now investigating Karen's financial dealings with the HOA. The embezzlement. Exactly. They want copies of all the contracts, receipts, and financial records. This has gone from a civil HOA matter to a potential criminal investigation. I sat down heavily. Barbara, this is getting serious. It gets more serious. Remember those 11 homeowners whose cars were damaged in the flood? They've hired a lawyer. A really good one. They're not just suing Karen for damages. They're suing her for punitive damages based on reckless endangerment. Their attorney found out that Patricia, the county inspector, had actually sent Karen a warning email 2 days before the concrete was poured, telling her that the area was a drainage corridor and couldn't be obstructed. Karen ignored a direct warning from the county. She deleted the email. But the county keeps records of all official correspondence. Patricia had a copy. Karen knew she was creating a flooding hazard, and she did it anyway. Over the next 3 weeks, Karen's world fell apart piece by piece. First, her lawsuit against me was dismissed with prejudice, meaning she couldn't refile it. The judge called it frivolous and vexatious and ordered her to pay my legal fees, which came to $18,000. Second, her defamation suit against Barbara was also dismissed. The judge noted that truth is an absolute defense to defamation, and Karen had failed to identify a single false statement Barbara had made. Third, her insurance company formally accused her of fraud and refused to pay anything for the Lexus. They also demanded she repay $12,000 from a previous claim they now believed was fraudulent. Fourth, the state attorney general's office confirmed they were pursuing criminal charges for embezzlement and misuse of HOA funds. The amounts involved were relatively small, under $30,000 total, but it was still a felony. And fifth, the 11 homeowners with damaged vehicles won a summary judgment against her for $92,000 in actual damages, plus attorney fees. Karen was financially ruined, but she wasn't done fighting. I was working on a kitchen renovation when my phone rang with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. David Harrison. The voice was male. Professional, unfamiliar. Who's asking? My name is Robert Mitchell. I'm a special agent with the FBI's white-collar crime division. I'd like to ask you some questions about Karen Chun and the Riverside Meadows HOA. I nearly dropped my phone. The FBI? Yes, sir. We've been investigating some financial irregularities, and your name came up in our review of HOA records. I want to be clear. You're not under investigation. We believe you may be a witness to certain activities. What kind of activities? I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Would you be available to meet tomorrow at 10 a.m. at our field office? I agreed. My mind racing. The FBI. What had Karen done that attracted federal attention? The next morning, I sat in a sterile conference room with Agent Mitchell and his partner, Agent Lisa Jong. They had folders thick with documents spread across the table. Mr. Harrison, what we're about to discuss is part of an ongoing investigation. Agent Mitchell began. We need you to keep this confidential. Can you do that? Yes. Good. We've been investigating Karen Chun for the past 6 months, initially based on complaints about her business practices. She runs a property management consulting company that advises HOAs on operations and financial management. She does, yes. She started it about 3 years ago, and over that time, she's become involved with 42 different HOAs across 3 counties. Agent Jong pulled out a chart. The pattern is consistent. She gets elected or appointed to a board position, then starts steering contracts to companies owned by her relatives or business associates. She takes kickbacks, ranging from 10 to 20% of the contract value. I stared at the chart. How much money are we talking about? Approximately $270,000 over 3 years. That's wire fraud, honest services fraud, and potentially RICO violations if we can prove it was an organized criminal enterprise. RICO? Like the mafia? Agent Mitchell nodded. Karen wasn't working alone. Her brother-in-law, her sister, and at least 4 other individuals were part of the scheme. They created a network of shell companies that existed solely to overcharge HOAs for services, then split the profits. What about Riverside Meadows specifically? Your HOA was actually one of the smaller operations. The real damage was in the larger communities. She cost one HOA in Fairview over $60,000 in a single year through fraudulent contracts. Agent Jong leaned forward. Mr. Harrison, we need you to testify about what you observed. Your documentation of the violations, the board meeting minutes, the financial records Barbara Martinez compiled, all of that is evidence we can use. Of course, anything you need. There's one more thing. Agent Mitchell pulled out a photo. Do you recognize this man? It was Richard Summers, the former board member who'd always voted with Karen. Yeah, he was on our HOA board. He resigned the same night as Karen. Richard Summers is Karen's first cousin. They've been working together for over a decade, moving from HOA to HOA, running the same scam. He'd get elected as treasurer or secretary. She'd become vice president or president, and they'd systematically loot the association funds through fraudulent contracts and inflated expenses. I felt sick. How many communities did they do this to? At least 42 that we've identified. Potentially more. We're still investigating. Agent Jong closed her folder. Mr. Harrison, this goes way beyond your driveway dispute. Karen Chun has been running a sophisticated fraud operation targeting homeowners associations across the region. Your complaint to the county about that drainage violation was actually what broke the case open. When the county started investigating the illegal construction, they discovered the contractor Karen hired wasn't properly licensed. That led to questions about how she hired him and whether there was any financial relationship. The contractor, trying to save himself, admitted Karen had paid him $25,000 for a job that should have cost $12,000, and he'd kicked back $6,000 to her in cash. He kept records. He kept very good records, because he'd been doing this with Karen for 2 years and was worried about getting caught. Once we had his testimony and his financial records, the whole operation came into focus. The meeting lasted 3 hours. They asked detailed questions about every interaction I'd had with Karen, every violation notice, every board meeting, every financial irregularity Barbara had discovered. I told them everything. As I was leaving, Agent Mitchell stopped me at the door. Mr. Harrison, I want you to know that what you did, standing up to Karen and documenting everything that made this investigation possible. A lot of people just pay the fines or move away. You fought back, and because you did, we're going to be able to stop her from victimizing anyone else. I drove home in a daze. The FBI. RICO charges. A multi-year fraud operation. My simple driveway dispute had uncovered something massive. Barbara was waiting for me at my house when I got back. You met with the FBI, she said. It wasn't a question. They talked to you too, this morning. David, did they tell you about the scope of this? $270,000. A whole criminal network. Barbara sat down on my porch steps. We almost didn't catch her. If you'd just paid those fines, if you'd moved your truck and given up, she would have kept going. How many more communities would she have destroyed? We got lucky. The rain, the flooding, her getting greedy with the lawsuit, that wasn't luck. That was her arrogance. She thought she was untouchable. Barbara looked at me seriously. The FBI said they're going to arrest her within the next 2 weeks. Federal charges. She's looking at 10 to 15 years in prison. What about Richard and Linda? Richard is going down with her. Same charges. Linda apparently wasn't involved in the financial fraud. She was just incompetent and went along with whatever they said. She might face some lesser charges, but the FBI's main targets are Karen and Richard. We sat in silence for a moment, watching the sun set over Riverside Meadows. The concrete barrier had been removed 3 days after the flood, at Karen's expense. My driveway was clear again. My truck sat in my garage, right where it belonged. You know what's crazy? I said finally. All of this started because she didn't like my work truck. No, Barbara corrected. All of this started because she's a criminal who saw our HOA as an easy target. The truck was just her excuse to start harassing you. If it hadn't been that, it would have been something else. She was right. Karen had picked the wrong community and the wrong person to target. If she'd left me alone, she might have gotten away with her schemes for years longer, but she didn't. And now she was going to pay for everything. My phone buzzed with a text from James. My attorney just got word from the courthouse. Karen tried to flee, booked a one-way flight to Singapore. TSA stopped her at the airport. FBI arrested her an hour ago. She's in custody. I showed the text to Barbara. She read it and smiled. A real, genuine smile. "It's over," she said. "Almost," I replied. "Still have to testify at trial." Looking forward to it? 6 months later, I was sitting in federal court, watching Karen in an orange jumpsuit as the prosecutor presented the evidence. The jury had been deliberating for 2 days. Barbara sat beside me in the gallery. Along with representatives from 17 other HOAs, Karen had The courtroom was packed. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, emails, testimony from the contractor, financial analysis from forensic accountants, everything. Karen's attorney had barely put up a defense. Richard had already pled guilty and agreed to testify against her in exchange for a reduced sentence. But as I watched Karen sitting at the defense table, her expression blank, I realized something was wrong. She was too calm. Tojo, compose. She should have been terrified, but instead she looked almost satisfied. The jury filed back in. The forewoman stood up. "On the count of wire fraud, we find the defendant Karen's attorney suddenly stood up. Your Honor, I need to request an immediate recess. I've just received information that may materially affect these proceedings." The judge frowned. "What information, counsel?" "Evidence that one of the prosecution's key witnesses may have falsified testimony." Everyone in the courtroom tensed. The attorney pulled out a document, evidence that David Harrison, the primary witness in this case, may have had a financial incentive to frame my client. I felt my blood run cold. What was he talking about? The judge looked at the prosecutor, who looked equally confused. "Your Honor, this is the first we're hearing of this because we just discovered it an hour ago." Karen's attorney held up the document. "Mr. Harrison recently received a payment of $75,000 from a property development company that has been trying to buy land in Riverside Meadows, land that Chun opposed developing. It appears Mr. Harrison may have fabricated this entire case to remove Ms. Chun and clear the way for this development." The courtroom erupted. Barbara grabbed my arm. "David, what is he talking about?" I stared at the attorney, my mind racing. I'd never received any such payment. I'd never been contacted by any development company. This was a lie, a complete fabrication. But how could I prove that in the middle of a trial? Karen's attorney just dropped a bombshell accusation. Is this real evidence or a desperate last-minute trick? What would you do if you were accused of something you didn't do in the middle of a trial? Drop your thoughts below. The courtroom was in chaos. Karen's attorney stood there, holding his document, a smug expression on his face as reporters scrambled to take notes and spectators whispered urgently to each other. I felt Barbara's grip tighten on my arm, her eyes wide with shock. "Your Honor," Karen's attorney continued, his voice rising above the noise, "this payment of $75,000 was deposited into Mr. Harrison's business account just 2 weeks before he filed his initial complaint with the county. The timing is highly suspicious and suggests a coordinated effort to remove Ms. Chun from her position." The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Catherine Rodriguez, was already on her feet. "Your Honor, this is completely improper. The defense is making accusations without any foundation, and they're doing it in the middle of trial after the evidence phase has closed. The evidence just came to light." Karen's attorney protested. "We received an anonymous tip and confirmed the payment through bank records. We have documentation right here." Judge Morrison, a gray-haired man with 30 years on the bench, held up his hand for silence. Approached the bench. "Both of you." Now, as the attorneys huddled with the judge, I turned to Barbara. "I never received any payment. I don't even know what development company he's talking about." "I know," Barbara whispered. "This is Karen. Even now, even facing prison, she's still trying to manipulate the system. Agent Mitchell, who'd been sitting 2 rows behind us, leaned forward and tapped my shoulder. "Don't panic. This is a Hail Mary defense tactic. Let the judge handle it." The attorneys returned to their positions, and Judge Morrison addressed the courtroom with barely controlled irritation. "The court will take a 1-hour recess while I review this alleged evidence. Mr. Harrison, you'll need to remain available. Bailiff, keep the jury in the deliberation room." The next hour was the longest of my life. Barbara, Agent Mitchell, and I sat in a small witness room while the prosecutor's team scrambled to investigate Karen's attorney's claims. My attorney, James, had rushed over from his office and was making urgent phone calls. "Okay," James said finally, hanging up and turning to me with a grim expression. "Here's what we know. There was indeed a payment of $75,000 deposited into a bank account. But it wasn't your account." "What?" "Someone created a fake business account using your company's name. And a slightly altered employer identification number. They forged your signature on the account opening documents. The account was opened 3 months ago, received this one large deposit, and hasn't been touched since. That's identity theft." Agent Mitchell said immediately, "And bank fraud." "Exactly. And guess who helped set up that account?" James pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. It was Linda Walsh, the former board member who'd resigned with Karen. "Linda works for a bank," Barbara said slowly. "She's a branch manager at Pacific Trust. Was a branch manager James She was fired 2 weeks ago for suspicious activity. The FBI is already investigating her for helping Karen set up shell accounts for the fraud scheme. This fake account in David's name is just another piece of that puzzle." Agent Mitchell was already texting on his phone. "I'm getting our forensics team on this right now. We'll have proof that account is fraudulent within the hour." We returned to the courtroom at exactly 1 p.m. The gallery was even more packed than before, with news cameras lining the back wall. This case had become a media sensation overnight. Judge Morrison entered, and his expression told me everything I needed to know before he even spoke. "I've reviewed the defense's evidence," he began, his voice cold. "Or rather, I've reviewed what the defense claims is evidence. Court records show that the bank account in question was opened using fraudulent documents. The FBI's forensic accounting team has confirmed that the signature on the account opening paperwork does not match Mr. Harrison's verified signature on file with his actual business accounts." Karen's attorney stood up quickly. "Your Honor, we received this information from a reliable source from your client." Judge Morrison interrupted. "Let's be clear about what happened here. Miss Chun, or someone acting on her behalf, created a fraudulent bank account in Mr. Harrison's name, had an associate deposit money into that account, and then anonymously tipped off her own attorney about it, hoping to derail this trial and cast doubt on the prosecution's star witness." The courtroom erupted again. I saw Karen's face go pale, her composure finally cracking. "This is not only a failed attempt at witness tampering," the judge continued, his voice rising, "but it's also bank fraud, identity theft, and obstruction of justice. Bailiff, please place Ms. Chun under additional custody for these new charges." 2 federal marshals approached Karen. She tried to stand, to say something, but her attorney pulled her back down, whispering urgently in her ear. Judge Morrison wasn't finished. "As for you, counselor, I'm referring you to the State Bar for knowingly presenting fraudulent evidence to this court. Whether you were complicit in creating this fraud or merely negligent in verifying it, you've violated your ethical obligations." Karen's attorney turned red. "Your Honor, I had no knowledge." "Then you should have verified before making explosive accusations in open court. You have 48 hours to withdraw from this case. I'll appoint new counsel for Miss Chun, though at this point, I'm not sure what defense could possibly be mounted." He turned to the prosecutor. "Senora Rodriguez, I assume you'll be adding additional charges." "Yes, Your Honor. Identity theft, bank fraud, and obstruction of justice. We'll file amended charges by end of business today." "Good now. Let's bring back the jury and finish this trial." The jury deliberated for only 45 more minutes. When they returned, the forewoman's voice was clear and certain. "On all counts of wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On all counts of honest services fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On all counts of conspiracy, we find the defendant guilty. Karen sat motionless as the verdicts were read. 17 counts. All guilty. The courtroom was silent except for the forewoman's voice and the quiet sobbing of Karen's mother in the back row. When it was over, Judge Morrison addressed Karen directly. Senora Chun, you've been convicted of defrauding dozens of homeowners associations over multiple years. You've stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from hardworking families. You've abused positions of trust and authority. And even when facing justice, you attempted to frame an innocent man with fabricated evidence. He paused, looking at her with something that might have been pity. Sentencing will be held in 30 days. Until then, you'll remain in federal custody. Court is adjourned. As the marshals led Karen away in handcuffs, she finally looked at me. Our eyes met for just a second. I saw no remorse there, no regret, just anger and disbelief that she'd actually been held accountable. Barbara and I walked out of the courthouse into bright sunshine. News cameras surrounded us immediately, but Agent Mitchell and his team created a buffer, guiding us to a waiting car. How does it feel? A reporter shouted. I thought about my answer carefully. It feels like justice. Not just for me, but for everyone Karen hurt over the years. For every homeowner she'll find unjustly. Every family she drove out of their community. Every person she made miserable just because she could. We drove back to Riverside Meadows in silence. The community looked different now. Lighter somehow. New board members had been elected. Barbara among them, still serving as president. The reserve fund was being rebuilt. Families were moving in instead of fleeing. I got an email yesterday, Barbara said as we pulled into the neighborhood, from a woman named Susan Park. She lives in Fairview. One of the other HOAs, she said our case inspired them to investigate their own HOA's finances. They found similar fraud, similar kickback schemes. They're filing their own lawsuit now. How many other communities do you think Karen destroyed? We may never know the full extent. But at least she can't hurt anyone else now. We stopped at my house. My driveway was clear, the concrete barrier long gone. My work truck sat in its usual spot, exactly where it belonged. You know what's funny? I said. None of this would have happened if she'd just left me alone. If she hadn't targeted me over that parking violation, she might still be out there, running her schemes. She got greedy, Barbara said. And arrogant. She thought she was untouchable. That's what always brings people like her down. 3 weeks later, I attended Karen's sentencing hearing. The courtroom was packed again, but this time with victims. Representatives from 23 different HOAs that Karen had defrauded were there to give impact statements. One by one, they told their stories. Elderly couples who'd lost their retirement savings to Karen's inflated service contracts. Young families forced to sell their homes because of special assessments needed to cover Karen's theft. HOA volunteers who'd been driven out by Karen's harassment and intimidation. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. Your Honor. Karen Chun blocked my driveway with concrete because I refused to be bullied. That act of petty tyranny led to the discovery of a fraud scheme that had victimized hundreds of families across 3 counties. She stole from communities, violated her fiduciary duties, and when caught, tried to frame innocent people to escape justice. She deserves the maximum sentence, not just for what she did, but for what she shows no remorse for doing. Karen's attorney made a half-hearted plea for leniency, citing her lack of prior criminal record and her difficult childhood. Karen herself finally spoke, reading from a prepared statement about how sorry she was and how she'd made mistakes. But Judge Morrison had heard enough. Ms. Chun, I've presided over fraud cases for 2 decades. I've seen genuine remorse. And I've seen calculated attempts to manipulate sentencing. What you just read falls firmly into the latter category. He consulted his notes. The sentencing guidelines suggest 8 to 10 years. However, given the scope of your crimes, the number of victims, your abuse of trusted positions, and your attempt to obstruct justice during trial, I'm sentencing you to 14 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. You'll also pay full restitution to all victims, currently calculated at $392,000, plus court costs and fees. Karen's legs gave out. Her attorney caught her as she collapsed, sobbing. Additionally, the judge continued, you're permanently barred from serving on any homeowners association, board, or property management organization. Upon release, you'll be prohibited from living in any HOA-governed community. He banged his gavel. We're adjourned. I watched as the marshals helped Karen to her feet and led her away. 14 years. She'd be 61 years old when she got out. Her life, effectively, over. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded us again. This time, I was ready with a statement. Today's sentence sends a clear message. HOA board members are not above the law. They're entrusted with their neighbors' money and their community's well-being. When they abuse that trust, there are consequences. I want to thank the FBI, particularly Agents Mitchell and Jung, for their thorough investigation. I want to thank Prosecutor Catherine Rodriguez for her outstanding work. And I want to thank Barbara Martinez for having the courage to stand up to corruption when it would have been easier to look the other way. Barbara stepped forward to add her own statement. Riverside Meadows is healing. We've implemented new financial controls, new transparency measures, and new procedures to prevent this from ever happening again. We're working with other HOAs across the region to share best practices and warning signs. Karen Chun hurt a lot of people, but she also inadvertently created a community of survivors who are now helping each other rebuild. The news coverage was extensive. Our story made national headlines. HOA vice president sentenced to 14 years for massive fraud scheme. Blocked driveway leads to federal investigation. How one man's parking dispute uncovered $250,000 fraud. But the best part came 2 months later. I was having breakfast when my doorbell rang. It was a courier with a certified letter from the FBI's Victim Compensation Fund. Inside was a check for $23,000, my share of the recovered funds from Karen's various bank accounts and seized assets. The letter explained that they'd recovered about 60% of the stolen money so far and were still working to recover more from Karen's accomplices. Richard Summers had pled guilty and was serving 6 years. Linda Walsh was serving 3 years for her role in the bank fraud scheme. Karen's brother-in-law and sister were awaiting trial. I donated the entire check to the Riverside Meadows Community Fund, earmarked for improvements to our common areas and facilities. That evening, Barbara organized a community barbecue in the park. Over 150 residents showed up, the largest gathering we'd had in years. Kids played on the playground. Neighbors chatted and laughed. The atmosphere was light and happy. Mr. Patterson approached me with a plate of burgers. You know, David, when you first moved here 16 years ago, I thought you were just another contractor. Turns out you're a hero. I'm not a hero. I just didn't want to be pushed around. That's what makes you a hero, he said seriously. Standing up when it's easier to back down. Fighting when everyone tells you to give up. You saved this community. As the sun set over Riverside Meadows, I looked around at the faces of my neighbors, genuinely happy for the first time in years. Children laughing. Families together. A community healing. My work truck sat in my driveway, right where it belonged. No concrete barriers, no violation notices, no harassment. Just a vehicle parked at a home in a neighborhood that finally felt like a community again. Karen had tried to destroy me over a parking space. Instead, she'd destroyed herself and inadvertently made Riverside Meadows stronger than ever. Sometimes justice takes time. Sometimes it requires fighting battles you never wanted to fight. But in the end, the truth comes out. And those who abuse their power face consequences. And sometimes, all it takes is one person who refuses to back down. I raised my drink in a silent toast to everyone who'd stood with me. Barbara, Agent Mitchell, James, Patricia, the county inspector, and all the residents who had documented violations and supported the investigation. Justice had been served, the community had been saved, and my driveway was finally, permanently, gloriously clear. And that's how a concrete barrier in my driveway led to a 14-year federal prison sentence. Karen thought she could bully her way through life, but she picked the wrong community and the wrong person. Have you ever had to stand up to someone abusing their power? How did it turn out? Share your stories in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more real-life HOA drama. Thanks for watching, and remember, never let anyone block your driveway.